Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
My name's Liam, and I never thought a seemingly simple move to a quiet, upscale neighborhood in Bellevue Heights would turn into an all-out war over a jacuzzi. But life has its surprises. Here's how the battle began. A few months ago, I moved into my dream house. As a 42-year-old tech entrepreneur, I'd worked hard to afford a property that checked all the boxes: modern architecture, spacious interiors, and a beautifully landscaped backyard featuring a high-end jacuzzi. For the first couple of weeks, life in Bellevue Heights felt idyllic. The nights spent in the bubbling warmth of the jacuzzi were the perfect way to unwind after long hours of coding and investor meetings. But that peaceful routine came to a screeching halt thanks to my next-door neighbor, Karen. Karen, a sharp-featured woman in her early 50s with a penchant for pastel cardigans and unsolicited opinions, first made her presence known one sunny Saturday evening. I was just settling into the jacuzzi with a glass of wine and some mellow music playing softly in the background when her voice cut through the air like a fire alarm. "Excuse me, what do you think you're doing?" she snapped from her side of the fence, her face peering over like an unwelcome specter. Startled, I looked up. "Just enjoying the evening. Can I help you?" This is unacceptable," she huffed. "That thing is a noise machine and completely against Bellevue Heights Homeowners Association guidelines." I frowned. "I'm pretty sure there's no rule about jacuzzis in the homeowner association agreement." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Oh, it's covered under the clause about excessive disturbances. The bubbling, the splashing, it's disruptive to the neighborhood's peace and tranquility." I blinked, dumbfounded. "It's barely 8 p.m. and quieter than most lawnmowers." Karen's expression grew colder. "I'm on the homeowner association board, Liam, and I can assure you this won't stand. If you don't cease using that monstrosity, there will be consequences." I watched her storm off, clutching her clipboard like a weapon. Shaking my head, I sank back into the warm water, trying to brush off her bizarre hostility. Little did I know, this was only the opening salvo. The next morning, I found a formal notice taped to my door. It was an official-looking letter from the homeowner association demanding the immediate cessation of all jacuzzi use due to excessive noise complaints and threatening fines. Fuming, I picked up my phone and called the homeowner association office. "Bellevue Heights Homeowner Association, this is Tina speaking," a chirpy voice answered. "Hi, this is Liam Carter at 221 Elmwood Drive. I'm calling about a ridiculous notice I received about my jacuzzi." Tina's tone shifted immediately. "Oh, Mr. Carter, yes, we've received a complaint from one of the board members." "A complaint?" I said, incredulous. "My jacuzzi isn't noisy. There's no legitimate reason for this." Tina hesitated. "Well, the board considers the matter serious enough to act on. You're welcome to file an appeal, but the next board meeting isn't for another month." "A month?" I repeated. "So I'm just supposed to stop using my own property until then?" "I'm afraid so," she replied, sounding far too cheerful about delivering such absurd news. I hung up, seething. This wasn't just annoying, it was a direct attack on my right to enjoy my own home. Determined not to let Karen and her cronies dictate my life, I spent the day combing through the homeowner association rules. As I suspected, there was nothing specific about jacuzzis, and the excessive noise clause was vague at best. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to fight back. That evening, as I stepped into the jacuzzi, Karen's voice rang out again. "Are you really ignoring the notice?" I glanced toward her yard, where she stood glaring at me like a self-appointed sentinel. "Yes, Karen, I am. And until you show me where it says I can't use my jacuzzi, I'll continue to enjoy it." Her face turned an alarming shade of red. "You'll regret this," she shrieked before storming back into her house. Later that week, the escalation began. Karen started monitoring my backyard like a hawk, reporting every instance of jacuzzi use to the homeowner association. Notices piled up, each one more threatening than the last. By the second week, she'd enlisted 2 other board members to join her crusade, and I was slapped with fines totaling over $1,000. I knew I had to take things to the next level. I called my lawyer friend Nate and explained the situation. "This is classic homeowner association overreach," Nate said. "They can't enforce vague rules to restrict your use of legally installed property. Start documenting everything, and don't pay those fines." With Nate's advice in mind, I began gathering evidence. Photos of the notices, recordings of Karen's confrontations, and even decibel readings to prove the jacuzzi wasn't excessively noisy. Meanwhile, Karen's harassment escalated. She began peering over the fence with binoculars, snapping photos, and even filming my backyard. One evening, she loudly berated me in front of guests, accusing us of disturbing the neighborhood. By this point, the absurdity of the situation was undeniable. But it wasn't funny anymore. Karen had made it her mission to make my life miserable, and I was done playing nice. One Friday afternoon, I returned home to find a crew of workers in my backyard preparing to disconnect the jacuzzi. Furious, I confronted them. "What do you think you're doing?" I demanded. A burly man holding a wrench looked up, startled. "We're here on orders from the homeowner association. They said this jacuzzi violates the rules and needs to be removed." Before I could respond, Karen emerged from her house, smug as ever. "You've ignored every notice, Liam. This is the consequence." I pulled out my phone and hit record. "Karen, you're trespassing on my property, and so are they. If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the police." Her confidence wavered. "We're within our rights." "No," I cut her off. "You're not, and we'll see what the police have to say about that." Minutes later, 2 officers arrived. After hearing both sides, they sided with me. The workers packed up and left, and Karen was warned about trespassing. I'd won this round, but I knew the fight wasn't over. Later that night, I called Nate. "It's time to take this to court," I told him. "I've had enough." Nate's voice was firm. "Good, let's hit them where it hurts." And so, the battle escalated to the next level. This wasn't just about a jacuzzi anymore. It was about standing up for my rights and putting an end to Karen's reign of homeowner association terror. As I prepared for the legal showdown ahead, I couldn't help but think that Karen had picked the wrong neighbor to mess with. The courtroom was packed. Word of my legal battle against Karen and the Bellevue Heights Homeowner Association had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and now curious onlookers and disgruntled residents alike had shown up to witness the spectacle. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered the room and called the case to order. My lawyer, Nate, looked confident as he organized the stacks of evidence we'd prepared. Karen and her homeowner association allies sat on the other side of the room, their faces a mix of indignation and unease. Karen's bravado had taken a noticeable hit since the police incident, but her determination to win and her belief in her righteousness remained palpable. The first order of business was presenting the evidence. Nate started with a detailed timeline of the events leading up to the lawsuit, including copies of every notice I'd received, photos of Karen's invasive behavior, and videos of the attempted hot tub removal. As each piece of evidence was submitted, Karen's expression shifted from defiance to visible discomfort. The final blow was a decibel reading report, which proved definitively that the sound of my jacuzzi was quieter than passing traffic. "Your Honor," Nate began, "this case isn't about noise or neighborhood harmony. It's about abuse of power. The homeowner association has no legal basis to restrict my client's use of his property, and the actions of certain board members, particularly Mrs. Karen Mitchell, demonstrate a clear pattern of harassment." Karen's lawyer, a wiry man with a slick demeanor, attempted to push back. He argued that the homeowner association's actions were within their rights and that they had only acted in the community's best interest. But his argument faltered when the judge pressed him for specific clauses in the homeowner association guidelines that justified their actions. When he couldn't produce anything concrete, the judge's disapproval was evident. Finally, it was Karen's turn to take the stand. She launched into a tirade about preserving the peace and character of Bellevue Heights, but her complaints came across as petty and exaggerated. Nate cross-examined her with precision, forcing her to admit that no other neighbors had formally complained about my jacuzzi and that her claims about excessive noise were purely subjective. When the judge asked her about the attempted hot tub removal, Karen's flustered response sealed her fate. "We were simply enforcing the rules," she stammered, "but maybe we overstepped slightly." "Slightly?" Nate countered. "You trespassed on my client's property and attempted to remove a legally installed amenity without his consent. That's not just overstepping, that's blatant harassment and a violation of his property rights." By the time closing arguments were made, the case against Karen and the homeowner association was overwhelming. The judge retired to deliberate, and the room buzzed with hushed conversations. Karen sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with everyone, while I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. Nate leaned over and whispered, "We've got this." When the judge returned, her ruling was swift and decisive. She sided entirely with us, declaring that the homeowner association's actions were unwarranted and unlawful. She issued an injunction preventing them from imposing further restrictions on my jacuzzi and ordered the homeowner association to reimburse me for all legal fees and fines I'd been issued. Additionally, Karen was found personally liable for damages related to harassment and trespassing. As the verdict was read, Karen's face turned pale. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, and I caught a few residents exchanging satisfied smiles. For once, Karen was on the receiving end of consequences, and it was clear that her iron grip on the homeowner association had been shattered. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Some neighbors approached me, offering congratulations and sharing their own grievances about Karen's overreach. A man named Greg shook my hand firmly and said, "You've done this neighborhood a huge favor, Liam. Thank you for standing up to her." As I drove home, a sense of relief washed over me. The battle had been exhausting, but it was worth it. Not only had I defended my rights, but I'd also exposed Karen's toxic influence on the community. That evening, I celebrated the victory with a long, relaxing soak in my jacuzzi. For the first time in weeks, there was no fear of confrontation, no anxiety about homeowner association notices. The neighborhood felt different now, freer, as if Karen's reign of terror had finally ended. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't one to admit defeat easily. And while this battle was over, I couldn't shake the feeling that the war might not be. The days following the courtroom victory brought a palpable shift in Bellevue Heights. The Homeowner Association Board, now leaderless after Karen's resignation, scrambled to reorganize. Notices about fines and restrictions stopped coming, and for the first time since I'd moved in, the neighborhood felt peaceful. But it didn't last. About a week later, I received an anonymous letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was scrawled and shaky, and the message inside was ominous. "Don't think you've won. We're watching." I stared at it, a mix of anger and unease creeping over me. Who would send this? Was Karen still scheming, or had someone else decided to pick up her crusade? I decided not to let it bother me. If anything, it strengthened my resolve. Karen and her allies had underestimated me before, and I wasn't about to let anonymous threats change how I live my life. That evening, I hosted a small gathering of neighbors in my backyard, a gesture of community solidarity. The jacuzzi was the centerpiece, of course, and the laughter and conversation filled the air. Among the guests was Greg, the neighbor who had congratulated me outside the courthouse. As we chatted, he leaned in and said, "You know, Karen wasn't working alone. There's a group of folks who've always supported her. They're still on the Homeowner Association Board." "That doesn't surprise me," and I replied. "But without Karen leading the charge, they don't have much power, do they?" Greg hesitated, his brow furrowed. "Maybe not, but don't underestimate them. They've been running things their way for years, and they don't like change. Keep your guard up." I nodded, appreciating the warning. Little did I know how quickly it would prove relevant. The following morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of heavy machinery. I rushed to my window and saw a crew digging up the strip of grass along the sidewalk in front of my house. Confused, I threw on some clothes and went outside to investigate. "What's going on here?" I asked one of the workers. "We're installing speed bumps," he replied curtly. "Orders from the Homeowner Association." "Speed bumps? Right in front of my house?" "Yes, sir. This location was specifically approved." Fuming, I called the Homeowner Association office. A frazzled-sounding assistant answered, and when I demanded an explanation, she stammered. "The board decided to prioritize traffic calming measures. They're being installed across the neighborhood, and yet the only one I see is directly in front of my house. Funny coincidence, isn't it?" There was a long pause before she mumbled, I'll pass along your concerns." I hung up, seething. It was clear this wasn't a coincidence. This was retaliation, petty, underhanded, and infuriating. But instead of lashing out, I decided to get smart. That evening, I went door to door, speaking with neighbors about the new traffic calming initiative. As it turned out, nobody else had been informed about speed bumps being installed, and many were just as annoyed as I was. A few residents even mentioned other strange projects popping up around their properties, all suspiciously targeted. Greg joined me in organizing a meeting with the Homeowner Association Board. We gathered signatures from neighbors and submitted a formal request for transparency regarding their recent decisions. It was a strategic move to hold them accountable and expose their tactics. When the meeting day arrived, the room was packed. Residents who had remained silent during Karen's reign were now emboldened to speak out. The board members, clearly uncomfortable, tried to maintain control, but the atmosphere was tense. "Why were speed bumps installed without notifying residents?" one neighbor demanded. "Who approved the landscaping changes on Elmwood?" another chimed in. I stood and addressed the board directly. "It's obvious that these actions are targeted. They're not about improving the neighborhood. They're about punishing residents who dare to challenge the status quo. That ends now." The board stammered out weak excuses, but the momentum had shifted. By the end of the meeting, a motion was passed to audit all recent homeowner association decisions. A committee of residents, including Greg and me, was formed to oversee the process. Walking out of that meeting, I felt a surge of hope. The fight wasn't over, but we were finally pushing back against years of unchecked power. Karen's departure had been the first crack in the facade, and now it was starting to crumble. That night, I relaxed in the jacuzzi, savoring a rare moment of calm. The glow of porch lights and the faint hum of cicadas filled the air. For the first time in weeks, I felt like the neighborhood was beginning to feel like home. But as I leaned back, letting the warm water soothe my muscles, I couldn't shake the feeling that this battle had more twists ahead. Karen might have been dethroned, but her allies were still out there. And if I'd learned anything, it was that they wouldn't go down without a fight. The final showdown began with an unexpected twist. One sunny afternoon, while I was reviewing emails in my home office, I heard a knock at the door. Opening it, I found a young woman standing there, clutching a folder and looking nervous. "Hi, Mr. Carter," she said hesitantly. "My name's Emily. I work for Bellevue Heights Homeowner Association, and I need to talk to you." Suspicious but curious, I invited her inside. She perched on the edge of the couch and opened the folder, revealing what looked like internal homeowner association documents. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing," Emily began, "but I can't stay quiet anymore. I've been working with the homeowner association for a few months and, well, there are things you should see." As she spoke, she handed me a stack of papers. They included emails and meeting notes detailing Karen's orchestrated campaign against me. It wasn't just the jacuzzi. Karen and her allies had been using homeowner association funds for personal projects, manipulating decisions to target specific residents, and bending rules to suit their interests. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, scanning the damning documents. Emily hesitated. "Because it's wrong, and because I overheard them planning something else. They want to push you out of the neighborhood entirely. They're trying to amend the bylaws to make your life unbearable." My jaw tightened as I processed her words. This wasn't just petty retaliation anymore. This was a vendetta. "Thank you, Emily," I said. "You did the right thing coming here. I'll make sure this gets addressed." As soon as she left, I called Nate. "We've got them," I said, outlining everything Emily had revealed. "This isn't just harassment anymore. It's corruption." Nate wasted no time filing an official complaint. With Emily's testimony and the documents as evidence, we brought our case to the local council. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the events of the past few months in my mind, from Karen's first confrontation to the courtroom victory, and now this. The homeowner association had underestimated me at every turn, but now they were facing the consequences of their actions. The hearing was tense from the start. Karen, despite no longer being on the homeowner association board, had shown up, sitting with her usual group of allies. Emily's testimony was clear and unwavering. She detailed the behind-the-scenes scheming and financial improprieties, her voice steady despite the glares from Karen and the board members. When it was my turn to speak, I presented the documents Emily had shared, along with my own evidence of harassment and misuse of homeowner association authority. The council members listened intently, their expressions growing graver with every piece of evidence. Karen's allies tried to defend themselves, claiming that their actions were misinterpreted or justified by their roles. But the evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the hearing, the council announced that an independent audit of the homeowner association's finances and activities would be conducted. Additionally, several board members were suspended pending the investigation. Walking out of the council chambers, I felt a wave of relief. Justice was finally catching up with Karen and her cronies. As I stepped into the sunlight, Greg met me outside, grinning. "You did it, Liam. You brought the whole house of cards down. Over the next few weeks, the audit uncovered even more corruption within the homeowner association. Karen's personal projects funded by homeowner association money, fabricated complaints against residents, and shady financial dealings were all laid bare. The fallout was swift. Karen was forced to leave the neighborhood entirely, and the homeowner association board was restructured with a new transparent election process. The neighborhood began to heal. Residents who'd been afraid to speak out before were now voicing their opinions, and community events became a regular occurrence. I hosted a celebratory barbecue in my backyard, complete with a jacuzzi party that felt like a symbolic victory lap. As the sun set on the gathering, I looked around at my neighbors, people who had once been strangers but were now friends. The fight had been exhausting, but it had brought us closer together. Bellevue Heights was finally becoming the community it was meant to be. A few days later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Karen, postmarked from a different state. The letter was brief and surprisingly sincere. Liam, I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. I see now that I let my need for control get the better of me. I'm sorry for the trouble I caused you and the neighborhood. I hope you can forgive me. Karen. I folded the letter and set it aside. Forgiveness wasn't easy, but it felt like a step toward closure. That evening, as I relaxed in the jacuzzi, I reflected on everything that had happened. The battle with Karen and the homeowner association had been a wild ride, but it had taught me valuable lessons about standing up for what's right and the power of community. Life in Bellevue Heights had taken a sharp turn, but for the better. And through it all, one thing remained constant: the warm, bubbling sanctuary of my jacuzzi. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.